My name is Marcus, and I found out my marriage was a financial crime scene because of a bank error that had nothing to do with either of us. It was a Wednesday morning in October, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open, trying to dispute a duplicate charge from our internet provider, when I pulled up 3 months of statements instead of one. That's the only reason I saw it. Not suspicion. Not some slow-building doubt I'd finally decided to chase down. A billing dispute for $41 cracked open something that had been running underneath my life for almost a year, and I want to be honest about that because it would be easier to tell you I was clever, that I noticed something was wrong and went looking. I didn't. I got lucky in the worst possible way a person can get lucky. I was 39 years old, a structural engineer with a firm downtown, the kind of job where I spent my days making sure buildings didn't fall down and my evenings assuming my own foundation was just as solid. Renee was 34, a freelance graphic designer who worked from a converted spare room upstairs, and we had Ava, 6 years old, who was obsessed that fall with a cartoon about a dog detective and asked me nightly whether real detectives used flashlights. There, halfway down the second page, was a recurring charge to something called Pinnacle Fitness and Wellness LLC. $340. Not once a month. Twice a week, every week, going back as far as the statement would show me, which was 3 months because that's all the bank kept readily accessible without a special request. Renee had a gym membership. I knew that. She'd mentioned it 11 months earlier, in passing, the way you mention something you don't expect anyone to ask follow-up questions about. $40 a month, she'd said. Someplace with good childcare hours near Ava's school. I remembered nodding, mildly pleased, thinking it was good for her, good for us, one more small piece of a life running the way it was supposed to run. $340 did not sound like $40 a month. $340 twice a week sounded like something else entirely, and I sat at that kitchen table for a long moment with my coffee going cold, doing math I didn't want to finish. If this had been happening every week for even half a year, we were talking about tens of thousands of dollars moving out of our joint account and into a business I'd never heard of, under a category I'd never questioned, because I trusted my wife enough not to audit her. I didn't say anything to Renee that morning. I watched her come downstairs in her robe, kiss Ava's head, complain about a client who wanted 4 revisions on a logo that should have taken 2, and I felt the strange, dislocating sensation of watching someone go through the motions of an ordinary life while some other version of that same life was apparently happening in parallel, somewhere I couldn't see. I told her I had an early site visit and left the house 40 minutes before I actually needed to, and I sat in my truck in the parking lot of a quick trip 2 miles from home, searching Pinnacle Fitness Wellness LLC on my phone and finding almost nothing. No website, no reviews, a single listing on a business registry site, filed under personal services, with a Tulsa address that, when I looked it up, belonged to a strip mall unit that had been vacant for over a year. Whatever Pinnacle Fitness and Wellness was, it wasn't a gym. I want to tell you what the following weeks felt like because I think anyone who's lived through something like this will recognize the particular exhaustion of it. Everything ordinary now had to be re-examined, and there is no version of examining your own life for hidden meaning that doesn't quietly poison the parts of it that were actually fine. Renee still went to the gym on Tuesday and Friday mornings, dropping Ava at school first, gone for roughly 2.5 hours each time. She came home with her hair damp, a gym bag over her shoulder, sometimes with a protein shake from a place I couldn't name. I had watched this exact routine for nearly a year and never once thought to question it, because why would I have? It looked like a woman taking care of herself. It looked like exactly what she'd told me it was. I called our bank and requested the full transaction history going back 18 months, which took 9 business days to process and arrived as a stack of PDFs I printed at the office because I didn't want that particular document sitting in our shared home printer queue where Renee might see it. When it finally came through, I sat in my car in the parking garage at work and went through it line by line, and the pattern held steady all the way back to the previous December. 2 charges a week, $340 each, to the same LLC, occasionally interspersed with a smaller charge, $60, $85, labeled under a slightly different business name, PFW Consulting, that traced back to the same registered address. Something tightened in my chest doing that math, a feeling I hadn't let myself name yet. Over 10 months, the recurring charges alone came to more than $26,000. $26,000, moving quietly out of an account I checked maybe once a month. glancing at the total balance and never once scrolling down far enough to see the shape of what was actually happening inside it. If you've ever discovered that a number you trusted completely was wrong by an order of magnitude, not slightly off, but wrong in a way that reorganizes everything you thought you understood, you know that the fear isn't really about the money at first. The fear is about how confidently you'd been walking around inside a version of your life that apparently didn't exist. I didn't ask Renee about it. Not yet. I told myself I needed more information before I said anything, which was true, but underneath that reasonable explanation was something less reasonable. I was afraid that if I asked and she had a real answer, some legitimate business expense, some private matter she hadn't wanted to explain, I'd feel foolish for having built an entire narrative out of a spreadsheet. I preferred, for a little while longer, the discomfort of not knowing to the finality of an answer I might not survive. Ava, meanwhile, had started asking why Mommy always smelled like flowers after the gym. I laughed it off the first time she said it, told her Mommy probably used a nice-smelling soap in the locker room. The second time she said it, 3 weeks later, I didn't laugh. I filed it away the way I'd started filing away almost everything by then. A folder in my head labeled things that don't add up, growing heavier by the week. I want to stop here for a second, because this is the part of the story I still think about most. There's a particular kind of loneliness in sitting across the dinner table from someone you've built a life with, watching them ask your daughter about her day, watching them be exactly the person you married in every visible way, while a folder of contradicting evidence sits in a drawer upstairs, and you say nothing because some part of you is still hoping the folder is wrong. If you've ever sat at a table like that, holding something that could change everything, not ready yet to put it down, you already know exactly what that felt like. By late November, the smaller charges under PFW consulting had started appearing on days that weren't Tuesday or Friday. A Sunday afternoon, a Wednesday evening when Renee had told me she was picking up a rush client job downtown. The pattern was widening. Whatever this was, it wasn't confined anymore to the 2 mornings a week she'd carved out under the label of self-care. It was bleeding into the rest of the calendar, and I understood, sitting with that fact, that I could not keep pretending I was still gathering information. I was avoiding a conversation, and the avoidance itself had a cost I was no longer willing to pay quietly. I found the man's name on a Tuesday, the same way I'd found everything else, not through any real cleverness, but through the accumulated weight of small facts finally arranging themselves into a shape I couldn't unsee. I drove to the strip mall address listed for Pinnacle Fitness and Wellness LLC on a Tuesday morning, parking across the lot from a nail salon and a defunct video game store, and confirmed what I'd suspected from the online listing. The unit was empty, a faded "for lease" sign taped inside the glass, dust visible on the floor through the window. Whatever business address this was, it existed only on paper. I sat there for a long time before I did something I'm not proud of. I drove to Ava's school instead, parked down the block, and waited until I saw Renee's car pull away after drop-off. Not toward the direction of any actual gym, but toward the east side of town, toward a residential neighborhood I had no reason to associate with fitness of any kind. I followed her, staying several car lengths back, feeling like a stranger inside my own body, doing something I had never imagined myself capable of doing to another human being, let alone my wife. She pulled into the driveway of a 2-story house with a well-kept lawn and a truck already parked out front. A truck registered, I'd later confirm, to a man named Wesley Prather. I sat parked at the end of the block for over 2 hours, watching nothing happen except the ordinary stillness of a residential street on a weekday morning, until Renee finally emerged, got back in her car, and drove to an actual gym, a real one, with a sign in a parking lot full of cars, where she went inside for exactly 40 minutes before driving home. She told me much later what those 2 hours in that house actually were, though I didn't understand any of it yet, sitting in my truck at the end of that street. I remember thinking, the first time Wesley suggested I invest in the wellness coaching program, that it sounded almost too structured to be anything but legitimate nutrition plans, accountability sessions, a business model he explained with real confidence. I told myself I was investing in myself, in my body, in the parts of me that had felt invisible since Ava was born and my whole identity narrowed down to mother and household manager. The first payment felt like something I was doing for me. I didn't tell Marcus the real amount because $40 sounded reasonable and $340 would have required an explanation I wasn't ready to give. Not because I was hiding an affair yet, that came later, but because I already knew somewhere underneath the excuse that I didn't want him asking too many questions about where I was going twice a week. That's what she told me, long after I'd already pieced most of it together on my own. The 40-minute gym stop, I understood later, wasn't incidental. It was the alibi, the physical evidence of a membership that technically existed, evidence she could point to if I ever asked to see a receipt, a card, a confirmation email. The whole architecture of the lie had a backup system built into it, which told me something I hadn't wanted to know yet. This wasn't impulsive. It had been planned, refined, protected for the better part of a year. I want to name something here that I completely missed until I went back through everything later. Renee had started keeping a separate, smaller wallet in her gym bag instead of her usual purse, something she explained once as just easier for the locker. And I remember thinking vaguely that seemed like an oddly specific reason to change how you carried your ID. I didn't push it. Looking back now, that was exactly the kind of detail I should have asked about directly. Not because a second wallet proves anything on its own, but because I'd stopped asking questions about the small logistics of her life months earlier, and a marriage where nobody asks about the small logistics is a marriage where an entire second life can be assembled out of gym bags and vacant strip mall addresses without anyone noticing the seams. I got Wesley Prather's full name off his mail, visible through the truck's cracked window, an insurance renewal notice sitting on the passenger seat, and spent the following weekend confirming what I already understood in my gut. He ran, or claimed to run, a personal wellness coaching business that had no verifiable clients, no real online footprint beyond a few sparse social media posts, and a financial structure that looked, to my engineer's eye, less like a business and more like a private arrangement wearing a business's clothing. The night I found the second wallet myself, tucked behind a stack of sketchbooks in Renee's studio while she was in the shower, I opened it and found a single photograph tucked behind her driver's license. Renee and Wesley at what looked like a lake house, both of them laughing, her hand resting on his forearm in a way that told me everything the financial records had only implied. I put the wallet back exactly where I'd found it. I did not confront her that night. I sat downstairs long after she'd gone to sleep, holding a truth I finally had complete confirmation of, and understood that whatever came next, I would be the one choosing the moment, not the one absorbing a moment chosen for me. I spent the next 2 weeks assembling something I never imagined I'd have to build against my own wife, a methodical, dated, cross-referenced record of 18 months of deception, organized the way I'd organize a structural report before presenting it to a skeptical client. Bank statements, highlighted and dated. A printed photograph of the vacant strip mall unit. Wesley Prather's registered business filings, which I obtained through the county clerk's office and which showed the LLC had been dissolved for non-payment of fees 4 months earlier, meaning the charges to our account had continued under a legally defunct business entity, which was its own small, cold detail I couldn't stop turning over. Even the fiction had stopped bothering to maintain itself. If you've ever spent 2 weeks living a completely ordinary life on the surface, packing lunches, helping with homework, answering "how was your day" with something plausible, while a folder of evidence against your marriage sat locked in a filing cabinet in your garage, you know there's a particular kind of exhaustion in it that has nothing to do with sleep. Renee noticed something. I wasn't as composed as I wanted to believe I was. She asked twice if something was bothering me at work. I said a project in Broken Arrow was giving me trouble. It wasn't. That was the first real lie I told her in 9 years of marriage, and I remember being almost surprised at how smoothly it came, how quickly a person can learn a skill they never wanted to need. I called the man's phone number, listed on an old flyer for his wellness program that I found stapled to a community bulletin board at a coffee shop near his house, purely to hear his voice attach itself to a name I'd only seen on paper. He answered on the second ring, and when I identified myself, there was a long silence before he said carefully, "I think that's a conversation you should have with Renee," and hung up. That silence told me more than a confession would have. A man running a legitimate wellness business doesn't hang up on a husband's first question. I want to stop here for a second because this is the heaviest part of these 2 weeks, and I don't think I've said this out loud to anyone before. There was a night, about 10 days before everything broke open, when I sat on the edge of our bed after Renee had fallen asleep, and I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in longer than I want to admit, and felt something close to tenderness even knowing everything I knew by then. Some of you have been here too, I think. That strange, useless love that doesn't switch off just because it should. I didn't wake her up. I didn't say anything. I just sat there in the dark, holding something that was about to change everything, not ready yet to put it down. I discovered, going through the last of the bank records, that the total pulled from our joint account over 10 months came to just over $31,000, money that had come, I realized, with a specific physical nausea, partly out of the fund we'd been building for Ava's education, a fund Renee managed because I trusted her with the household finances the way I trusted her with everything else. I didn't know it then. This is what she was living through, in her own words, when she finally told me much later. The first time I gave Wesley cash instead of letting him bill it as coaching sessions, I told myself it was a gift, something separate from what Marcus and I had, something that didn't count against anything because it wasn't taking anything away from our actual life. I kept telling myself that every single week, even as the amounts grew, even as I started dipping into Ava's fund because my own freelance income couldn't cover what I was spending anymore. I remember the exact moment I transferred money out of that account for the first time. My hands were steady, which scared me more than if they'd been shaking. I'd become someone who could do that steadily. That's what she told me. I knew none of it yet, though the bank records had already told me the shape of the number, if not the shame underneath it. By the time I had everything organized: statements, the dissolved LLC filing, the photograph from the second wallet, Wesley's evasive silence on the phone, I understood I was no longer gathering evidence out of doubt. I had certainty. What I didn't have yet was a plan for what certainty was supposed to do with a marriage, a 6-year-old, and $31,000 that wasn't coming back. I chose the following Saturday to confront her, once Ava was at a birthday party across town. I didn't tell Renee what was coming. I wanted, for once in this entire ordeal, to be the one who controlled the moment instead of the one absorbing it. I laid the folder on the kitchen table before Renee had even set down her keys, and I watched her face when she saw the first bank statement on top, highlighted in yellow. Not confusion, but a specific, fast recalculation happening behind her eyes. "The gym membership is $40, I said, keeping my voice level, because I had promised myself I would not shout, would not become someone I didn't recognize in front of my own kitchen cabinets. "This is $340, twice a week, for almost a year." She sat down slowly, still in her coat, and said, "It's a wellness coaching program. It's more comprehensive than a regular membership." I should have explained it better. I placed the printed photo of the vacant strip mall unit in front of her. "This is the registered business address. It's been empty for over a year." She said the business had moved locations, and that the registration probably just hadn't been updated, that these things happen with small businesses all the time, that I was reading too much into an administrative oversight. I placed the dissolved LLC filing next to it. The business itself was dissolved 4 months ago. The charges kept coming after that. She paused, recalculating again, and said maybe Wesley had restructured under a different entity and the payment processor hadn't updated, that she'd ask him about it, that this was clearly some kind of paperwork confusion that didn't reflect anything about the actual coaching she was receiving. I placed the photograph from the second wallet on the table last, her and Wesley at the lake house, her hand on his forearm. The room went very quiet. "That's from a work retreat his program organized," she said, but her voice had lost its earlier smoothness. "It's not what it looks like, Renee. It's exactly what it looks like." She stopped trying to explain the photograph and pivoted instead to questioning how I'd gotten into her things, asking whether I'd been following her, whether this was really about the money or about something else entirely, something in me that had never trusted her fully to begin with. I recognized the shift immediately, not an admission, not yet, just a redirection, an attempt to make the conversation about my methods instead of her actions. I said nothing about my own doubts, my own blind spots. I simply placed the last document in front of her, the full accounting of $31,000, with the withdrawals from Ava's education fund highlighted in a separate color. Watching her look at that final page, I understood something about myself I hadn't let myself see clearly until that exact moment. I had spent years being the reliable one, the steady one, the husband who handled the big financial decisions and left the day-to-day details to her because I trusted her completely, and somewhere in all that trust, I had stopped actually looking at what handling the details meant in practice. That didn't make what she did acceptable. It never would. But it explained something about how a hole this large could open up directly under our life without me noticing until a billing dispute cracked it open by accident. She finally stopped deflecting when she saw Ava's fund highlighted. Something in her posture changed. The composed, careful recalculating gave way all at once to something rawer. She put her face in her hands and didn't speak for almost a full minute. I told her I needed her to leave for the night. Not forever. I wasn't ready to say forever, not with that word sitting in my mouth for the first time. But I needed the house, and the silence in it, without her in the middle of that silence making it heavier. She asked where I expected her to go. I said I didn't know and didn't particularly care, which was cruel, and I said it anyway, because for the first time in months I wasn't managing anyone's feelings but my own. Renee stayed at her sister's for 2 weeks. She called most evenings, and for the first several calls, I could hear her still trying to manage the story. Smaller numbers, softer framing, careful phrasing designed to narrow what had happened back down to something survivable. I stopped answering some of those calls, not out of cruelty, because I needed, eventually, to hear the version of the truth that wasn't shaped for my comfort. And I understood she wasn't going to give me that version while she was still afraid of what the full truth would cost her. She finally gave it to me on a Thursday evening, on our back porch, after asking if she could come by to talk without Ava around. She finally spoke. This is what she told me in her own words that night. It started with the coaching sessions being real at first. I was genuinely trying to get healthier, feel like myself again after Ava. Wesley was good at his job, and he noticed things about me nobody else had noticed in years. That I was tired, that I felt invisible, that I'd stopped being anything but somebody's mother and somebody's wife. I told myself getting close to him didn't count as anything, because it started as work. The first time I let him bill it under a different name, I told myself it was just simpler, that Marcus didn't need to see every line item of a wellness plan. That was the lie I told myself to make it feel small. It didn't feel small. It felt like I finally had something in my life that was entirely mine. Something you couldn't ask me about at dinner. By the time I started paying him in cash out of Ava's fund, I knew exactly what I was doing, and I kept doing it anyway because stopping meant admitting what I'd already become, and I wasn't ready to be that person yet. I'm ashamed of the exact moment I decided her college fund was an acceptable place to pull from. I still can't look at her savings account statement without feeling sick. I'm not telling you this to make it smaller, Marcus. I'm telling you because you deserve the actual shape of it, not the version I kept trying to give you at the kitchen table. That's what she told me. I finally had the whole shape of it, months after I'd started needing it. I didn't say much that night. I told her I appreciated her finally saying it plainly, and that I needed time before I could tell her what came next. She nodded and left without pushing, which I understood as its own kind of respect, arriving far too late to change anything. The divorce took 8 months. I retained a forensic accountant who traced every dollar of the $31,000, which mattered enormously in court, both for the settlement and for rebuilding Ava's fund, which the judge ordered restored in full from Renee's share of our remaining assets. I was awarded primary custody, the house, and the majority of what we'd built together over 9 years, not out of vindictiveness, but because the paper trail told a story no judge could interpret any other way. I think about the $40 number sometimes, how small it sounded when Renee first said it, how completely I accepted it without a single follow-up question. I understand now that I hadn't been trusting my wife so much as I'd been avoiding the discomfort of ever checking anything at all. And those aren't the same thing, even though they'd felt identical for most of 9 years. The cruelest detail in this whole story isn't the $31,000 or the photograph in the second wallet. It's that the affair began as something almost legitimate. A woman who felt invisible after becoming a mother, seeking out a coach who genuinely helped her feel physically stronger, before that relationship quietly metastasized into something that cost her daughter's future and her marriage. Betrayal rarely starts as betrayal. It starts as a real need finding the wrong person willing to meet it, and by the time the need and the deception have fused together, neither party can locate the seam between them anymore. What this story revealed to me over time wasn't really about Renee's math, or even about Wesley. It was about the particular danger of a marriage built on divided labor instead of shared visibility. I handled the big financial decisions. She handled the daily logistics. We called that a system. It was actually a wall, built one reasonable-sounding division of labor at a time, and walls built that way don't announce themselves as walls until something on the other side has already grown large enough to need one. The way I discovered the truth matters more than it might seem. It arrived through a billing dispute that had nothing to do with either of us. Pure accident, not vigilance, not suspicion earned through careful attention. That means the truth had been sitting there in plain sight for nearly a year, in statements I never scrolled far enough to actually read. This is the real accumulation effect underneath everything. Not one massive failure, but hundreds of small, unexamined moments. A balance glanced at instead of studied. A story accepted instead of verified. Compounding quietly until an unrelated $41 dispute was the thing that finally cracked it open. I don't know if there was a version of our marriage that could have survived even a partial version of this. What I know is that the version of me who checked a total balance once a month and called that handling the finances had to disappear for me to build anything honest going forward with Ava or with anyone else. Losing that version of myself is, strangely, the part of this story I grieve least. If there's one thing I'd want someone listening to this to sit with tonight, it's this: trust isn't the same thing as never checking. I spent 9 years calling my own inattention trust and felt virtuous about it. Right up until a folder full of bank statements told me exactly what that inattention had cost. If you manage a household with someone else, money, schedules, the small logistics neither of you talk about at dinner, I gently ask you to actually look at the details sometimes, not out of suspicion, but out of respect for what you're building together. A number glanced at isn't the same as a number understood. I don't regret the 9 years, and I don't regret Ava, who is the one part of this I'd never trade away. I regret the version of myself who mistook a comfortable routine for an honest marriage, and I've had to make peace with the fact that the mistake cost more than money ever could have on its own. If someone let you down financially or you ignored a number that didn't quite add up, I'd genuinely like to know in one word, in the comments. And to whoever made it this far with me tonight, thank you for sitting with something this heavy. It helped more than you probably know.